sorry. Some wrong.
That's why,
Thank you.
yeah, but that's why we have turn our cell phones and things like that off, because somebody's suddenly pregnant and they're telling everybody in the world that they're pregnant and things along that line, you know. Want to spread the joy. So, yes, always remember, turn your cell phones off or any device that's going to make noise when you're in a lecture hall. That's always nice. Let's finish up this chapter here. We are working with the internal or inner ear. We've talked about the cochlea, and we're going to finish up with the cochlea. The cochlea looks like a snail shell when you look at it. When you dig the bone out from around it, it has that snail shell appearance. And that's the bony labyrinth. Inside it is the membranous labyrinth. And so there's 3 divisions as you follow the spiral of the cochlear shell of that membranous labyrinth: the scala vestibuli, scala media, and scala tympani. The scala media is where we have the spiral organ of Corti, and it's also called the cochlear duct. So that's the area that we're really interested in how we transduce sound into an electrical vent to send it to our cerebral cortex. This picture right here, I'll do it again, review like that. This picture right here is meant to show you that we are looking at the cochlea, but we are uncurling it. So let's go ahead and uncurl it ourselves and draw things out. So that's where we have this schematic diagram of the membrane and resonance. So we're going to make a drawing rather similar to this for ourselves. So let me put this here, and let's give us a little bit more. No, don't do that. There we go. A little bit more space. I'm going to make an oval up here, and I'm going to make what looks like a giant test tube. And I'm going to then, where it ends, that lip ends, I'm going to make something round, and I'm going to put a connection between the two. So where does the stapes go? On the oval or the round window? On the oval window. So let's put our stapes on the oval window. Looks a little bit like a stirrup. So we'll put our stapes there. And then we're going to put our cochlear duct in the middle. And it's not going to go all the way out to the end. And we're going to make this kind of another line on top of what's the actual basilar membrane. And it goes all the way out to the end, because this is the area that's meant to actually represent our hair cells. And they are like columnar cells, so then we'll make little teeth marks or vertical lines. And I'm just going to go dot, 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 because that's going to go all the way down. And just to remind us that they are columnar cells, you can put little nuclei at the base or on the basilar membrane. Sitting on top of them is the tectorial membrane. And so I'm going to make a little blue line here, also going all the way out to the end of that. Coming on back, trying to give it a little bit of width. I made my area a little bit too narrow here for the cochlear duct, but it gives the impression that there's this blue line sort of suspended on top. I'm going to go ahead and make some cilia or microvilli coming off of my hair cells, because that's why they're called hair cells. They look like they have a hairy surface. And embed that into the undersurface of the tectorial membrane. So this is our round window. This is, our oval window. This is our round window. This is our scala vestibuli. This is our scala tympani. And what kind of fluids in the scala vestibuli and scala tympani? Do you guys remember? Perilymph, indeed. So don't forget, perilymph is here. So then what's in the scala media? Endolymph. And that's important, because wherever we have our hair cells or anything that looks like these hair cell guys, we have endolymph there, and endolymph is very important because it has a certain chemical makeup, and so it's going to have a different ionic composition than our perilymph does. And ions are very important in helping us to actually initiate action potentials. So that's one of the reasons why it's important that you realize that the endolymph and perilymph are two totally different types of substances. When a sound wave comes in and hits the tympanic membrane, it will start the vibration of the ossicles in a similar pattern. And so I'm just going to make a wave-like look here. And it will then push on the oval window at the same rate that the tympanic membrane is actually vibrating or oscillating back and forth. This will spread then because we have now this overflow or relief valve with the round window. It will allow a fluid wave to actually then be created, and a fluid wave will be created in this area, and based upon its pitch or frequency, it will pass through our cochlear duct or scala media, and it will then go into the scala tympani, and it will first bump up that basilar membrane in that area, and that basilar membrane where it actually passes through is very pitch or frequency dependent, and that's called resonant, where it passes through. When it passes through the cochlear duct, what's really interesting, it does not stimulate the spiral organ of Corti at all. The spiral organ of Corti requires that the basilar membrane is pushed up to where the hair cells then have the hairs bent on the undersurface of the tectoral membrane. And so it's this afterward bounce up that's important. So it's the movement of the basilar membrane that actually stimulates the hair cells. And it's a bounce up. Now we'll still have that fluid wave here. So as the oval window moves in, the round window will be bulging out. And so we do know that. This here, the schematic diagram that we're drawing, is just that snail shell, and its membranous labyrinth all stretched out. One of the things that's important is that it is continuous. The scala vestibuli is continuous with the scala tympani here at this tip. The length of the cochlear duct dictates the frequency of our range of our hearing. And I thought I mentioned last time, when a teenager's driving down the road on a nice sunny day, you guys know that it's a teenager. And there are still adults that act like teenagers, so in my mind, even if it's an adult, it's a teenager. And they have their music blaring, and you can't appreciate what the song is unless you really know the bass part of it very well. But that's what you always hear first. So the bass, or the lower pitch, always travels the furthest. Then when they're up next to you, you can hear the rest of the music. You can hear the high frequency and all those others. So keep that in mind when I ask you how far down the cochlear duct will a low pitch wave travel. How far will it travel before it actually passes through the cochlear duct? A long way. And so what you have to realize, and that's what this little diagram here is all about. Here is the pitch in hertz. 20 hertz is passing all the way down to basically the tip of the cochlear duct. That's our range. That's the lowest that we frequency that we can actually hear it. But it's the furthest away. And that's because of the phenomenon of how sound waves travel. So the lower the pitch, which is the lower the number here, the further it travels. The higher the pitch, because we can hear 20,000 hertz for our high pitch sound range, the closer it is to our stapes, our oval and round window. So it's showing you that high pitch stuff passes through here, low pitch stuff passes through here, and then stuff in the in-between. We have this range in between. How about dogs? Do they have the same range of hearing that we have? They can hear higher pitch, and they can also hear lower pitch. And so let's just make up in our mind, how could we make our cochlear duct more similar to a dog's cochlear duct if we wanted to hear even a lower pitch, like 10 hertz. Make it longer. And indeed, that is part of their differences in the construction of their anatomy of the cochlea and the spiral organ according. Let's go ahead now and look a little bit at the notes. So our frequency range is, our hearing frequency is 20 to 20,000 hertz. That's our range. Why do we lose certain frequencies in our ability to hear? Did we used to have them? Yeah. And so why did they go away? We lost our neurons, right? When you can't smell, why can you not smell? You lost your neurons. Same thing with hearing. When you lose your neurons with hearing, you cannot hear those neurons that were associated with that pitch. Do we get that hearing back? No. So the problem for us is we can damage the neurons that are involved with the spiral organ, and we will therefore permanently lose that ability to hear that pitch. What is the most reasonable cause of that frequency hearing loss? Amplitude, right? Hence the tensor tympani and the stapedius. Amplitude. When you start beating on a hair cell and you beat it to death, it ain't coming back. And that's a problem for our society right now, isn't it? See, when I was a kid, we didn't have all these earbuds and headphones. So if I wanted to play my music loud, it was loud and my parents heard it and they were yelling at me, turn it down. Well, when people have earbuds in their ears and you walk by and you can hear the music, should maybe they be turning it down? So we're going to end up with a lot of youngsters as well as oldsters with increasing hearing loss as in the next 20, 30 years. Our notes talk about summary of steps in sound production. Well, remember it's a waveform. We're moving the tympanic membrane. We're moving the ossicles of the bridge. We're moving the oval window. We're moving the perilymph in the scala vestibuli, and we're going to have a pass-through in the cochlear duct and then have a bounce up of the basilar membrane to trigger our hair cells to actually then transduce that physical event into an electrical event. Sound is going to move the fluids within the cochlea. High-frequency sound activates stiff hair cells close to the oval window. Yep, I think we got that understood. And low-frequency sounds travel further to activate what end up being a rather floppy hair cells distally. Humans detect that 20 to 20,000 hertz. Now, that's the cochlea, which is involved in hearing. Now we're going to go to equilibrium, where we have two areas of the inner ear responsible for that. That's the vestibular apparatus and also our semicircular canals. Let's take a look at the vestibular apparatus, which is right next to the cochlea. It contains receptors for, as I mentioned earlier, static equilibrium. And now I'm also going to let you know also for linear acceleration. And this is going to be all because of gravity related effects. The macula are the receptors in this area, and they are inside the membranous structures called the utricle and saccule. And so these receptors are going to be for horizontal and vertical planes. And you're on a horizontal plane when you accelerate, and when you go up and down an elevator, you're moving along a vertical plane. So that's what we're talking about with linear acceleration. The macula are made up of three different components. We have support cells, which are there to help maintain the health and integrity of our hair cells. And our hair cells have this stuff called sterocilia, which sometimes is referred to as microvilli, plus one kinocilium. That kinocilium is very important in maneuvering or manipulating the sterocilia. In addition to hair cells, we have the structure overlying them, just like we have the tectorial membrane. It's interesting. We have another thing overlying our hair cells called the otolithic membrane. And the hairs from our hair cells are embedded in the undersurface. Of this otolithic membrane, and it's a jelly-like substance is one of the common descriptors. Otoliths means stone. So membranes, jello material is overlying our hair cells, and it has embedded in it these calcium stones, which are there for weight. They add weight to this otolithic membrane. They make it heavier, and in doing so, this will increase inertia or drag. Inertia means not to move, and then once you do get it moving, it stays moving for a while. And that's also that drag aspect to it. So the more stones you add, the harder it is to get it moving, but it will stay in its position for a long time before it actually gets back. The less stones you have, the easier it is to move, but also the easier it is for it to actually resume its normal position and have less drag. So that's an important thing, because if you actually affect the stones in the otolithic membrane, you will affect the sensory signals going to the brain, which will then cause you some vestibular or balance-related issues. Our notes here say the maculae respond to changes in body position, and this is related to gravity and linear acceleration. Here is a cartoon picture. We'll draw our own picture, but here's a cartoon picture of our hair cells, these guys here, and the support cells, and their sterocilia off to the side in a brush-like descending fashion that are that are kind of attached to that kinocilium. And let's go ahead and draw our own little horizontal plane. Let's make a wedge here of hair cells. Make them look columnar. We're not too interested in our support cells right now. And let's make our kinocilium tall and a couple of guys next to him. What you need to realize, and I'll put a little bobble at the top, what you need to realize is that the kinocilium has a slight, like it's a little rope that's going down and attached to the doors or gates of our sterocilia. So this isn't real cilia. They look like hairs, and they call them cilia or microvilli, but they are real structures that actually have dimension to them. And so even though I draw them as a line, you could think of them as like this with a door at the top. And that's what our little dot, dot, dot is meant to represent. This is a line on the door. And if I pull on this line that's on this door, which happens to be closed at this time, what will that do to that door? Open it. And that's why these guys are mechanical gates. It's a mechanical way that we're actually opening up this gate to allow ions to flow in. And so in order for this to happen, we have to cause that kinocilium to actually move. And so let's put our otolithic membrane on top of this, and we'll put our stones in it, and realize we're all surrounded here now by endolymph, not perilymph, but endolymph, and I physically move this direction. What will happen to the otolithic membrane as I physically move in this direction? It will cause the otolithic membrane to actually go in the opposite direction. And when I do that, all of my kinocilium will be pulling on all of the doors of the sterocilia, causing ions to flow in to actually cause a depolarization. If I were to stop, what then happens? Then it goes in the other direction for a moment, correct? And so then we'll close all the doors and even hyperpolarize them. And take a look down here at the pictures of the macular activation mechanism for these mechanical gates. So here it is. We aren't moving at all, and we have a constant slow depolarization actually occurring. If you were to look back or up, we actually are pulling on all of those little doors, and we get an increase in depolarization rate. If we were to look forward, we'd be closing the doors, so to speak, and we get a decreased depolarization rate above even normal. And so it's this change that we experience that sends us information to the brain. It's this way for our macula as well as for our crista ampullaris. And that's where we are going into now, is angular acceleration. And that's where, indeed, it is the crista ampullaris that is the receptor. Now, these receptors are found in the ampulla of the semicircular canals. And they are going to respond to rotational, like a spinning machine, and angular movements, like you're doing somersaults or riding a roller coaster or things along that line. And remember, it is the change that we need to experience. We will end up with the change in our depolarization rate. The crista, often referred to as just plain crista or crista ampullaris, contains, again, a similar makeup: support cells and hair cells, which have the sterocilia and the kinocilium. But we just have a cupula. We don't have otoliths. We do not have anything that increases the drag. So this mechanism does not need that component for its activation or hyperpolarization event, which would be the opposite effect. So no stones for this one. And here are the semicircular canals off to the side, and here is the swelling, which is what an ampulla is. The swelling, where we find the crista ampullaris. And it looks like this teardrop hat overlying a bump in the road, so to speak, or speed bump that is covered with our support cells and hair cells. And you can see, as you take a look at this, we have still that arrangement of the sterocilia and the kinocilium. if we were to draw this too, to make sure that we understand its construction, make yourself a circle. On the inside, make a nice speed bump and make another circle. And draw at 90 degrees to the speed bump a little wedge of columnar cells with their kinocilium and sterocilia. With the cupula over that. So now, this is surrounded by what kind of fluid? On the inside? Endolymph. This is endolymph. So now when I am moving this way, which direction does the endolymph move? Opposite direction. Again, the same process. Opposite direction. Now, as you continue to spin, so remember, it's changes. As you continue to spin and keep spinning, will that fluid ever start to catch up with the outside world, so to speak? It will, because of friction on the inside. Friction will actually then cause the fluid to slow down, moving in the direction, the opposite direction, correct? Until eventually, if you keep spinning long enough, the fluid will follow what I call the outside world. So the inside fluid will start to follow. But you're going to have to do a lot of spinning, correct? And so as you spin a lot, we'll start to slow down the movement of the endolymph, which is again a change, which will then be perceived. But you have to do a lot of spinning. That's why some of those ice skaters can spin for as long as they do, because they've actually adjusted the sensitivity of the crista whenever they do those spinning type of activities. And it's the change that you experience, because when you guys did the Bernet test in lab, you were spinning that person 10 times around, correct? And then when you stopped them, what then happened? The fluid kept moving and was moving then in the opposite direction, so to speak, on the inside, right? It's all on the inside. It's the fluid on the inside that we end up starting to move it in the opposite direction. And the person felt like they were, for a moment, if they were honest, they felt like they were spinning in the opposite direction because they were being activated in that aspect. And so that's how this system works. Very similar to the macula, correct? Except we don't need as much drag here in this area. So our notes talk about activating the cristae. Endolymph moves in the opposite direction that you are moving in. And this will cause a depolarization. And then will hyperpolarize when the endolymph is moving in the opposite direction. And so it is important to understand the cristae respond to changes in this movement of fluid and therefore activation of their hair cells. So this is just like macula, but no need for otoliths. And if you added otoliths, because this is the way this system is tuned, if you actually added otoliths, you would impact the type of nerve conduction received by the brain. And so this one is quite different from that. One thing that I will ask you, whenever you do any sort of spinning or somersaults or cartwheels, what's the minimum number of crista that you will activate whenever you're doing those things? What's the minimum number? These are in horizontal, vertical, and posterior planes, or basically like frontal, coronal, and sagittal planes. How many of the cristae will you activate whenever you're doing cartwheels, for example? 2. And why 2? Well, it's even simpler than that. You have 2 ears. So in that aspect. So we're talking about things. Remember, we talk about things and get into details, but don't forget we have the same thing on the other side. And so whenever you activate one side, you'll be activating the other. And that's why can you imagine if you only got info from one side, then everything would actually be screwed up in your head, and you would not, literally, you would have significant balance related issues. So we're done with that chapter. We're on to the next chapter. That's part of our upcoming exam. We're on to chapter 17 from our text called the endocrine system. This system is very important for our homeostasis. We are electrochemical, neurochemical, and hormonal beings. In order for us to survive in our world, we need to have ability to respond right away to any sort of threatening changes in our environment. But we also need to have a system that takes care of things generally. And that's where the endocrine system comes into place for our homeostasis. We know the nervous system can be activated quickly, but it is actually, when you look at it, it is short-lived. And that is because it fatigues. You run out of neurotransmitter. If you keep activating it, it will indeed fatigue. Your ability to hold up a 20-pound brick is not going to last forever off to the side. You will fatigue and you will have to put it down. The hormonal system, or our endocrine system, will give us control that is slow to start because it's having to circulate around in the bloodstream to get to our target organs. But once it gets to our target organs, it lasts a long time. So it takes up the slack for the nervous system. We have a lot of organs associated with the endocrine system. So endocrine versus exocrine. Do you guys remember the difference between those two organs? Exocrine excretes to a surface. Endocrine delivers their product or hormone, because if they're endocrine, their product is called a hormone, to the bloodstream. And then the bloodstream takes that product and delivers it to what are called the target cells. And the target cells are the ones that are going to be able to respond to that hormone. We have a whole bunch of different organs that we're going to talk about. We have the hypothalamus. We have the pituitary, often called the hypophysis. We have the pineal gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid glands, our adrenal glands, the thymus. We also have the pancreas, the testes, and the ovary. All of those organs produce hormones that are released into the bloodstream to circulate to their target organs to activate them into doing whatever it is that they're supposed to do. In this top list here, before we get into the one below that, what other functions occur with 3 of these organs specifically? This guy here, this guy here, and this guy here. What do you associate those guys with? What system have we talked about? Brain, so therefore nervous system. So our hypothalamus actually is a nervous system structure. Pituitary gland is also a nervous system structure, and so is the pineal gland. We talked about there. So they have a dual function. Other organs that also have a dual function are the pancreas, testes, and ovary. Now the pancreas dual function, what's its endocrine function? When you think of the pancreas, what hormone do you guys think of? Insulin, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're also going to learn about glucagon, which is another hormone that the pancreas actually produces and secretes into the bloodstream. What other things does the pancreas do for you? Do you know? People take pills for it when it's not working too well. Pancreas actually produces enzymes which are involved in Digestion. So the pancreas has a dual function. It's an exocrine organ for digestion and an endocrine organ for glucose homeostasis. The testes and the ovary, they produce hormones. Testes, testosterone, ovary, estrogen, and progesterone. What else do they also produce besides hormones? Sperm and eggs, gametes. Boy, if you guys didn't answer to that, you need to go back and talk to your mom and dad about the birds and bees. Absolutely. Okay, so that is an additional function for those. So we have some dual roles here with our endocrine organs. Hormones are what we call the secretory product. And there are two categories of hormones based upon their molecular structure. And we have hormones that are amino acid based, which most hormones fall into this category, or steroid based. If we say that you are amino acid based, what's another word you can use for things that are made from amino acids? Protein. Polypeptides, right? So don't forget some of those words, because those are easy words to actually slip into an exam to make sure that you remember the stuff that you were taught a long time ago. It seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? So amino acid base means that they're also protein or polypeptide. And what's important about the amino acid based hormones is that they are actually considered water soluble. So they can be dissolved in the plasma of your blood. And most of our hormones indeed fall into this category. Steroid-based means that they are synthesized from cholesterol. Are these guys water soluble? No, they are not water soluble. They are lipid or fat soluble. And because of that, they require carrier proteins to transport them around in the bloodstream. These carrier proteins help prevent degradation, prevent or slow down and degradation is breaking down of these proteins. And when this is an interesting process, whenever the carrier protein is moving it around, the hormone is bound. So hormone is bound when it's moving it around. And when we're going to use it, it's unbound. So the carrier protein is there to slow down degradation, to get it where it needs to be, and it will be bound whenever it's moving it around. Well, then when it's unbound, it means that it's releasing it to its target organ. And the unbound is also referred to as free. So when you hear free hormone levels, they're actually talking to you about probably steroid-based hormones and the carrier proteins. So bound and unbound. Bound means carrier proteins moving it around, and unbound means that we've actually released it to actually go into our target cell. Only from adrenal cortex and gonads. So we've talked about it in the past. An easy way to recognize a steroid-based substance is sterone is its ending. So testosterone, progesterone, and we're going to learn aldosterone. Now estrogen doesn't have the sterone ending, but estrogen is still a steroid-based hormone. The unbound, as I mentioned earlier, is the only one that is active. because it's the one that's going to go into the cell to activate that cell. There's a repetition in the notes about steroid synthesis, use and elimination. And I'm not going to talk about the first one, so you can X that out in your notes because we'll come to it again in just a moment. Target cell specificity. And this is important because the hormones are dumped into the bloodstream. They circulate around in the bloodstream, but they only are going to activate cells that they're destined to activate. And the cells that they're destined to activate obviously must have receptors for that hormone. And so this is an interesting aspect because the receptors for the hormone on the target cells the target cell receptor density is dynamic, which means it alters, it changes. And let's take a look at this dynamic situation for the receptors on our target cells. The process where it moves up and down, number of receptors a target cell has, is called upregulation and downregulation. If we create more receptors, that's up in the numbers, more receptors, we end up becoming more sensitive to that hormone. So we have more receptors that can potentially reach out and grab and bind the hormone for ourselves. Why would we actually want to upregulate or downregulate our receptor density of our cells? Do hormone levels always stay exactly the same? No, they vary. And so as they vary through the day, the cells will actually be able to detect that and also change the number of receptors that they have if they have a need. If you have a need for more of that hormone for your cellular metabolism, what will you do? Will you downregulate or upregulate? Upregulate. Now, there is another reason to also upregulate or downregulate, and that's because you're starting to experience a hormone deficiency. So if you have, this process is very active, and H will be our abbreviation for hormone. Let's give you an example. Somebody is becoming, let's say insulin deficient, insulin dependent diabetic. What do you suppose that person's body does to try to maintain a normal homeostatic balance when they start to actually lose what we'll learn about their beta cells? They will start to upregulate. Also, if somebody is becoming hypothyroid, hypo means low thyroid hormone levels, what will their body do first to try to help reestablish a homeostasis? Upregulate. And so that's a lot of reasons why sometimes people will have a condition for a while before it's ever recognized, because their body was able to upregulate and use what little bit that they have at least somewhat efficiently. But is that going to last forever? It doesn't. And so they will not be able to maintain that upregulation because there's going to be a continuous deficiency of that hormone, and then symptoms will actually start to apply. Downregulation occurs when we actually decrease the number of receptors. And so this is going to occur if hormone levels are very high. An example is hyperthyroidism. Hyperthyroidism means too much thyroid hormone. And if you have too much thyroid hormone telling your cells, work, 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 more, because thyroid hormone is directly related to cellular metabolism, work more, harder, more, the cells will go, I'm tired of hearing this, and they will downregulate and decrease their number of receptors, so they decrease the amount of thyroid hormone that they actually take into the cell or that impacts the cell. And so this regulatory process is very important in homeostasis as well as trying to mitigate or minimize the damage from a pathological hormone situation. What hormones do at the cellular level? So these are possibilities of what hormones can do to our cells at the cellular level. They can alter membrane permeability to various ions. And we'll talk about aldosterone as how it does that in the kidneys for sodium and potassium. It can stimulate protein synthesis, and our example here is collagen and enzymes. Growth hormone is great for that. It will affect enzyme activity. It will activate or deactivate various enzymes inside the cell. Thyroid hormones very good for activation processes. It will increase the secretory activity of glands. And when we have a hormone doing that, that type of hormone that causes another gland to secrete a hormone is called a tropic hormone. So we're going to have almost a cascading event of hormones stimulating another hormone to be released. And cell division increases the rate of mitosis, and indeed, that's something that you see also with growth hormone. I think we'll go ahead and stop there. We'll talk about the messenger system next time, and do a clicker and get you guys out.